Ryan sat in the dimly lit kitchen, staring at the empty chair where Emma should have been. Her laughter echoed faintly from the voicemail on her phone, except it wasn't meant for him. That was the moment he knew their marriage was a lie. "Lauren," voice dropped to a whisper, her eyes glinting with the thrill of gossip. "If you really want the truth, Ryan, ask her where she was last Friday night." The air around them grew heavier. What is this? Emma's trembling voice barely carried over the room as she stared at the table littered with photos and messages. Ryan leaned back, his voice devoid of emotion. Caleb smirked, his arrogance dripping like venom. "You're not strong enough."
"To ruin me, Ryan." But when Ryan slid the folder across the table, Caleb's smirk vanished. Ryan closed the door to his empty home for the last time, the sound echoing through the silence. He took one final glance at the life he was leaving.
Behind, a life built on lies, and walked away without looking back. Welcome to the Alibis Exposed, where trust meets betrayal in the dark. Ryan Carter woke up to the soft sound of Emma humming in the kitchen. The melody was faint but familiar, one she often hummed when in a good mood. For Ryan, mornings like this always felt like a blessing. The sun filtered gently through the curtains, casting a warm glow over their cozy home. He stretched, letting the comfort of his surroundings sink in, and walked toward the kitchen, where the smell of freshly brewed coffee greeted him. Emma stood by the counter, her auburn hair catching the morning light, making her look almost ethereal. She turned when she heard Ryan approach, her face breaking into a bright smile. "Morning, love," she said, handing him a steaming cup of coffee. Her voice carried the same warmth that had made him fall for her years ago. "Morning," Ryan replied, leaning in to kiss her on the cheek. "You're up early?" Emma shrugged, taking a sip of her own coffee. "Big day ahead. I have a lunch meeting with some new clients, and I'm hoping to close the deal. Figured I'd get a head start." Ryan smiled. Emma's dedication to her work was one of the things he admired about her. She was a marketing director for an upscale luxury brand and had worked tirelessly to climb the corporate ladder. "You'll do great," he said. "You always do." They chatted briefly about their plans for the day before Emma grabbed her bag and keys. As she walked out the door, she turned back, her smile as radiant as ever. "Don't forget to eat lunch. Love you." "Love you too," Ryan replied, watching as her car pulled out of the driveway. For a moment he stood there, sipping his coffee, feeling a flicker of unease that he couldn't quite place. He shook his head, dismissing it as paranoia. Emma had always been supportive and loving. There was no reason to doubt her. Emma's day, however, was far from what she'd described to Ryan. Her supposed lunch meeting was actually an appointment at an upscale hotel in the city. She parked her car in the underground lot, glancing at herself in the rearview mirror to adjust her makeup. Her heart raced with anticipation, a mix of guilt and excitement that had become all too familiar. As Emma entered the hotel lobby, Caleb Ford was already waiting. He leaned casually against a pillar, his tailored suit accentuating his confident, commanding presence. When he saw her, a sly grin spread across his face. He walked toward her, his hand brushing against her waist as he leaned in for a kiss. "You look stunning," Caleb said, his voice low and smooth. Emma laughed, feeling her cheeks flush. "You always know how to make a girl feel special." Caleb's charm was irresistible, and Emma couldn't deny the thrill he brought into her life. Their affair had started months ago, a whirlwind of stolen moments and secret rendezvous. With Caleb, Emma felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. She told herself it wasn't about Ryan, that her husband was a good man. This was about her, about finding something she felt she'd lost. "Ready?" Caleb asked, offering his arm. Emma hesitated for a brief moment before taking it. They walked toward the elevator, her heart pounding as the doors closed behind them. Meanwhile, Ryan's day was a stark contrast to Emma's. He spent the morning at his tech consulting firm, meeting with clients and solving their software problems. Ryan had built his business from the ground up, and though it wasn't flashy, it was something he was deeply proud of. His employees respected him not just for his expertise, but for his genuine care and kindness. At lunch, Ryan found himself thinking about Emma. He wondered how her meeting was going, picturing her confidently presenting her ideas. He couldn't help but feel lucky to have someone so driven and passionate by his side. But as the hours passed, that flicker of unease from the morning returned. It was subtle, like a shadow lingering at the edge of his mind. When Ryan returned home that evening, Emma was already there, busy in the kitchen. The aroma of her homemade lasagna filled the air. She turned and smiled as he walked in, just like she always did. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked. "Good." "Busy," Ryan replied, setting his bag down. "How about yours? Did the meeting go well?" Emma's smile didn't falter. "It went great. They loved my ideas. We're set to finalize the deal next week." "That's amazing," Ryan said, genuinely happy for her. He kissed her on the forehead, feeling foolish for the nagging doubt that had been bothering him all day. As they ate dinner, Ryan noticed Emma's phone buzzing on the counter. She glanced at it quickly, her expression unreadable, before flipping it over. "Lauren's been texting me all day," she said casually. "She's having some drama with her boyfriend again." Ryan chuckled. "Sounds like Lauren." Emma nodded, but Ryan couldn't help but notice how quickly she changed the subject. It was a small thing, but it stuck with him. Later that night, as Emma slept beside him, Ryan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He tried to push the doubts away, telling himself he was overthinking. Emma loved him. She'd always been there for him, through the highs and lows. But the little inconsistencies in her behavior nagged at him, the way she'd locked her phone so quickly, the nervous laugh when he'd asked about her day. Ryan closed his eyes, willing himself to sleep. He told himself he had no reason to distrust her, but deep down a part of him knew that the foundation of their marriage wasn't as solid as he'd believed. The perfect illusion of their life together had begun to crack, and once a crack appears, it's only a matter of time before it spreads. Ryan's days began to blur together after that night. He tried to brush off the unease, but it clung to him, refusing to be ignored. Every small interaction with Emma felt different, as if there was a barrier between them that he couldn't see but could feel. Her laughter seemed lighter, her eyes not quite meeting his as they used to. One Saturday morning, as Ryan sat on the living room couch with his laptop, Emma's phone buzzed on the coffee table. She was upstairs getting ready for a brunch outing with her friends. He glanced at the phone out of habit and saw a notification flash across the screen. "Caleb, can't wait to see you again. Yesterday was incredible." Ryan's heart stopped. He stared at the screen, unable to move. The phone buzzed again, this time going dark before he could read more. He knew he shouldn't, but his hands moved on their own. He picked up the phone and swiped to unlock it, only to find that it was password protected. The ease with which Emma used her phone in the past had changed in recent months, and now Ryan understood why. He set the phone down quickly when he heard her footsteps coming down the stairs. She walked into the room, smiling as she adjusted her earrings. "Hey, does this look okay?" she asked, gesturing to her outfit, a floral sundress with heels that made her look effortlessly elegant. Ryan forced a smile. nodding. Yeah, you look great. Emma beamed and leaned in to kiss him on the cheek. Thanks, love. I'll be back in a few hours. Let me know if you need anything. Sure, Ryan said, his voice tight. As she walked out the door, Ryan's mind raced. The message from Caleb was seared into his memory. He had no proof of what it meant, but the implication was clear. A part of him wanted to confront her right away, but another part held him back. If she was hiding something, he needed to be sure before bringing it up. Emma's brunch with her friends wasn't a complete lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. She had planned to meet Lauren afterward for a quick coffee. Lauren, ever the instigator, had been a confidant throughout Emma's affair with Caleb. She listened, advised, and even encouraged Emma to follow her desires, no matter the cost. You
can't keep juggling both forever, Lauren said, stirring her latte as they sat in a corner booth at a bustling cafe. Ryan's sweet, but Caleb is exciting. Don't you think it's time to decide? Emma frowned, sipping her cappuccino. It's not that simple, Ryan.
He's been nothing but good to me. I don't want to hurt him. Lauren raised an eyebrow. And yet here we are. Look, I'm not judging, but you're lying to yourself if you think this won't blow up eventually. Secrets like this have a way of coming out. Emma's phone buzzed on the table. It was another message from Caleb. She ignored it, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. I just need more time, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lauren smirked. Time isn't on your side, babe. Ryan spent the rest of that weekend trying to act normal, but his mind was a whirlwind of suspicion and doubt. On Sunday afternoon, he decided to test the waters. As they sat on the couch watching a movie, he casually asked, So, how was brunch yesterday? Emma didn't hesitate. Oh, it was nice. The girls are all doing well. Lisa's planning a trip to Italy, and Sarah's finally engaged. She rattled off the details with ease, her expression relaxed. Ryan nodded, though his stomach churned. Her composure only deepened his suspicion. If she was hiding something, she was doing an excellent job. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Ryan made a decision. He couldn't go on like this, second-guessing every word she said and every look she gave. He needed answers. Quietly, he slipped out of bed and went to his office. He had never been the type to snoop, but desperate times called for desperate measures. He opened his laptop and started searching for ways to access a locked phone without the password. The idea of invading Emma's privacy made him feel sick, but the thought of continuing in the dark felt worse. After an hour of searching, Ryan realized he didn't have the technical skills to hack her phone. Instead, he decided on a different approach. He would watch, observe, pay attention to the little details that might reveal the truth. If Emma was lying to him, she'd slip up eventually, and when she did, he'd be ready. On Monday morning, Ryan's plan to observe Emma began in earnest. He noticed how she always kept her phone face down now, how she'd started taking calls in another room. He paid attention to the way her smile seemed a little too bright when she talked about her day, as if she were trying to overcompensate. The cracks in their perfect illusion were growing, and Ryan couldn't unsee them. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, Ryan decided to test her again. Lauren called me today, he said casually, watching her reaction closely. Emma looked up, her fork hovering in mid-air. She did? What for? Just to chat. She mentioned you two had coffee after brunch. Emma's expression didn't change, but there was a slight pause before she answered. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. It was last minute. She wanted to catch up. Ryan nodded, hiding the surge of anger he felt. He knew Lauren hadn't, called him. He had made it up to see if Emma would admit to meeting her. The fact that she lied confirmed his suspicions. Ryan's next move came a few days later. While Emma was in the shower, he saw her phone sitting on the nightstand, unguarded. He'd thought about this moment for days, debating whether or not to cross the line. His hands shook as he picked it up. The screen lit up, revealing a notification from Caleb. "When can I see you again? I miss you." Ryan's chest tightened as he stared at the message. There was no denying it now. The woman he had built his life with was betraying him. He put the phone down just as Emma stepped out of the bathroom, her hair wrapped in a towel. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing the look on his face. Ryan forced a smile. "Yeah, just thinking about work stuff." Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. But Ryan knew things would never be the same. The perfect illusion of their marriage had shattered, and all that remained was the cold, hard truth. Now the question was, what would he do with it? Ryan's world had shifted in an unrecognizable way. Every time he looked at Emma, it was as if he was staring at a stranger. But he said nothing. Not yet. He wasn't sure if it was fear or strategy holding him back, but Ryan knew he needed more than just a text message before confronting her. He wanted the full truth, no matter how painful. Emma, oblivious to Ryan's suspicions, continued with her double life. Her behavior, however, was becoming more inconsistent. She'd leave the house claiming to meet Lauren, but her explanations became increasingly vague. And Ryan noticed something else. Emma was slipping. A half-hearted excuse here, a missed detail there. It was as if the weight of her deception was catching up to her. One evening, as Emma sat at the dining table, scrolling through her phone, Ryan brought up a topic he'd been carefully planning to broach. "You've been spending a lot
of time with Lauren lately," he said, casually setting down his coffee mug. "Everything okay with her?"
Emma glanced up, startled by the question. Yeah, she's just going through some stuff, relationship drama." Ryan nodded slowly. "Must be tough. You've been a good friend to her." Emma smiled, a flicker of relief crossing her face. "Thanks. She's lucky to have someone to talk to." Ryan's heart twisted. Her lies came so easily now. He knew Lauren wasn't the one she'd been spending her time with. The next day, Ryan decided to take his investigation a step further. He called Lauren. It was a calculated risk. If Emma found out, it could ruin everything. But he needed answers. "Hey, Lauren," Ryan said when she picked up. "Sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to check in. Emma said you've been going through some stuff, and I thought I'd see how you're holding up." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh," Lauren said, her voice laced with confusion. "That's sweet of you, Ryan, but I'm
Fine. Why do you ask?" Ryan's stomach dropped. "Emma mentioned you've been leaning on her a lot lately. I just wanted to make sure you're okay."
Lauren laughed lightly. "I haven't seen Emma in over a week. We've both been so busy, but tell her to call me soon. I miss her." Ryan forced a chuckle. "Will do. Take care, Lauren." When he hung up, his hands were trembling. The lies were piling up, and now he had outside confirmation. Whatever Emma was doing, Lauren wasn't part of it. That weekend, Ryan decided to follow Emma. It was a desperate move, but he was running out of options. On Saturday afternoon, Emma told him she was heading to a spa with Lauren. "Don't wait up," she said, with a kiss on his cheek before grabbing her bag and walking out the door. Ryan waited 10 minutes before grabbing his car keys and heading out. He parked a few houses down from their driveway, watching as Emma's car turned out of the neighborhood. He followed at a safe distance, his heart pounding in his chest. After 20 minutes, Emma pulled into the parking lot of a high-end restaurant. Ryan parked across the street, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as he watched her get out of the car. She was dressed impeccably, her hair and makeup done as if she were going on a date. And then he saw him. A tall, well-dressed man walked up to Emma and kissed her on the cheek. Ryan's vision blurred with anger and betrayal as he watched them enter the restaurant together. He wanted to storm in, confront them, demand answers. But he stayed in his car, his mind racing with the implications of what he had just seen. That night, Emma returned home, acting as if nothing had happened. She greeted Ryan with a warm smile and asked about his day. Ryan played along, his anger simmering just below the surface. He couldn't confront her yet. Not until he had a plan. Over the next few days, Ryan's emotions swung wildly between heartbreak and fury. He began piecing together the fragments of Emma's betrayal, compiling a mental timeline of her lies. He also started digging into the man he'd seen her with. A quick search of the restaurant's website and social media confirmed his identity. Caleb Ford, a prominent real estate developer. Caleb's online presence painted a picture of a successful, arrogant man who seemed to thrive on attention. Ryan's hatred for him grew with every post he read. This was the man who had stolen his wife's affection, who had shattered the life they'd built together. But Ryan's anger wasn't just directed at Caleb. Emma's betrayal cut deeper than anything he'd ever experienced. The woman he'd loved and trusted had made a mockery of their marriage. And yet, she still came home to him every night, pretending as if nothing were wrong. Ryan knew he couldn't go on like this. He needed to confront Emma, but he also wanted her to feel the weight of her actions. He wanted her to understand the pain she'd caused, and most of all, he wanted her to see that he wasn't the weak, naive husband she thought he was. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Ryan made his first move. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone casual. "We haven't been spending much time together lately. How about a date night this weekend?" Emma looked up, surprised. "Oh, that sounds nice, but I think I have plans with Lauren on my Saturday." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Maybe you could reschedule. It's been a while since we had some one-on-one time." Emma hesitated, her expression unreadable. "Okay, let me check with Lauren and get back to you." Ryan nodded, a small victory won. He knew she wouldn't go to Lauren, she'd go to Caleb, and this time he'd be ready. Ryan spent the week meticulously planning his next steps. Every interaction with Emma was a performance now, a delicate balance of keeping up appearances while suppressing the storm brewing inside him. Her cheerful facade grated on him, but he masked his emotions well, knowing his time to act was drawing near. Saturday arrived, and Emma's plans with Lauren conveniently changed to a casual outing with Ryan. She wore a bright smile as she dressed for their date, her outward excitement a stark contrast to the cold calculations running through Ryan's mind. They went to a cozy Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place they used to frequent in the early years of their marriage. As they sat across from each other, Ryan couldn't help but study her every move, the way she played with her wine glass, the occasional glance at her phone, the way her smile faltered for just a moment when she thought he wasn't looking. "You seem distracted," Ryan said, breaking the silence. Emma looked up, startled. "What?" "Oh no, I was just thinking about work." Ryan nodded slowly, swirling his own glass of wine. "Work must be stressful lately. You've been so busy?" Emma's lips tightened into a smile. "Yeah, it's been a lot. But I'm glad we're doing this. It feels good to reconnect." Ryan's chest tightened at her words. Was she trying to convince him or herself? After dinner, they took a stroll through the park. The evening air was crisp, and the soft glow of the streetlights created an almost romantic atmosphere. But for Ryan, the night was anything but. He had planted the seeds of doubt earlier in the week, and now it was time to see if they would bear fruit. "Emma," he began, his tone casual but laced with intent. "I talked to Lauren the other day." Emma's step faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Oh? What about?" Ryan kept his gaze forward, pretending not to notice her reaction. "Just checking in on her. She said she hasn't seen you in a while. I thought that was odd, considering how much time you've been spending together." Emma laughed nervously. "Oh, she probably just forgot. You know how Lauren is." Ryan murmured, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, maybe." The conversation shifted after that, but Ryan could feel Emma's unease growing. She was fidgety, her responses more clipped than usual. He had struck a nerve, and it gave him a twisted sense of satisfaction. Later that night, as Emma slept beside him, Ryan got out of bed and went to his office. He opened his laptop and began going through the footage from the GPS tracker he had discreetly installed in her car. It had been a gamble, but it paid off. The tracker showed that she had been to Caleb's office twice that week, along with a few other locations that didn't match the stories she had told him. Ryan leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Every piece of evidence he uncovered solidified his resolve. He wasn't just gathering proof anymore, he was building a case, a carefully constructed plan to expose Emma and Caleb for who they really were. The following Monday, Ryan left for work earlier than usual, but not before ensuring Emma's day would begin on a tense note. He had printed out a photo he had taken of her and Caleb at the restaurant weeks ago. It wasn't incriminating enough to serve as definitive proof of an affair, but it was damning enough to rattle her. He placed the photo on the kitchen counter, right where she would see it, and left without a word. When Emma saw the photo that morning, her heart stopped.
Her hands trembled as she picked it up, staring at the image of herself laughing with Caleb outside the restaurant. Her mind raced. Had Ryan seen them? How had he gotten this picture? Was this some kind of cruel joke? Her phone buzzed, breaking.
Her spiral of thoughts. It was Caleb. "Hey, gorgeous," he said when she answered. "You free for lunch today?" Emma's voice was shaky. "Caleb, we need to talk. Ryan, he might know something." There was a pause on the other end. "What do you mean he might know something?"
I found a photo of us on the kitchen counter. I don't know how he got it." Caleb cursed under his breath. "Stay calm. He's probably just fishing for a reaction. Don't give him one. Act normal. We'll figure this out." Emma
nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Okay, I'll try." But as she hung up, her composure began to crack. Ryan had never been the jealous or suspicious type. If he was starting to dig, it meant she had underestimated him. That evening, Emma tried to gauge Ryan's mood, but he seemed as calm and composed as ever. They ate dinner in relative silence, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. Every time Emma opened her mouth to speak, Ryan would look at her with an intensity that made her words die in her throat. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. "Ryan, is everything okay?" He looked up from his plate, his expression unreadable. "Why wouldn't it be?" Emma fidgeted with her napkin. "I don't know. You've just seemed off lately." Ryan's lips curved into a small, almost sinister smile. "Have I? Must be work. Things have been busy." Emma nodded, but she didn't believe him. She could feel it in her gut. Ryan knew more than he was letting on. And the thought terrified her. Over the next few days, Ryan continued his subtle game of psychological warfare. He'd leave little clues, an ambiguous comment here, a knowing look there. He wanted Emma to unravel, to feel the same torment he had been enduring. And it was working. Her behavior grew more erratic, her lies more transparent. Meanwhile, Ryan began reaching out to people in Caleb's orbit. A few discreet conversations with mutual acquaintances revealed just how deeply Caleb's arrogance ran. He had a reputation for seducing married women, treating them as trophies rather than people. The more Ryan learned, the more determined he became to bring Caleb down. The climax of Ryan's plan was approaching, and he knew it had to be executed flawlessly. He wasn't just seeking revenge anymore. He was setting the stage for a reckoning. Emma and Caleb thought they were in control, but they were about to learn just how wrong they were. Ryan's meticulously crafted plan was beginning to take shape. Every thread he'd unraveled from Emma's web of lies was being woven into his own narrative, one designed to not only expose her infidelity, but to leave her and Caleb reeling in the aftermath. The game was no longer about confrontation, it was about control. The week started with Ryan making an unexpected visit to Lauren. He had no intention of directly involving her, but Lauren had proven herself to be a wild card. Her toxic relationship with Emma could be leveraged if necessary. Arriving unannounced at her apartment, Ryan carried a bottle of wine, masking his true intentions with casual charm. Lauren greeted him with surprise, her curiosity piqued. "Ryan, what brings you here? Shouldn't you be working?" Ryan smiled, offering the bottle. "Thought I'd drop by for a friendly chat. We don't talk much, and I figured it was time to change that." Lauren's eyes narrowed slightly, but she stepped aside to let him in. "Well, this is unexpected. Come in." As they settled in the living room, Ryan wasted no time steering the conversation toward Emma. He painted himself as a concerned husband, subtly prodding Lauren for information. "Emma's been distant lately," he began, feigning vulnerability. "I've noticed she's been spending a lot of time away from home. I figured you'd know what's going on." Lauren hesitated, her loyalty to Emma clashing with her natural inclination to stir the pot.
Well, she's been busy. You know how she gets when she's focused on something." Ryan leaned forward, his tone carefully measured. "Focused on what, though? It feels like there's a part of her life she's keeping from me. If you know something, Lauren, I'd appreciate your honesty."
Lauren's lips twitched into a smirk. "Ryan, you're a good guy, but sometimes good guys miss what's right in front of them." Her cryptic response only fueled Ryan's determination. He left her apartment with more questions than answers, but he'd achieved his goal. Lauren's words would linger in her mind, planting seeds of doubt about her own role in Emma's life. If she cracked under pressure, it would only serve his purpose. Meanwhile, Emma was beginning to feel the walls closing in. Ryan's subtle games were taking their toll, and Caleb's cavalier attitude wasn't helping. When she confided her fears to him over lunch, Caleb dismissed them with a wave of his hand. "Ryan's bluffing," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Even if he suspects something, what can he do? He's just trying to scare you." Emma frowned, pushing her salad around on her plate. "I don't know, Caleb. He's been acting so calculated lately. It's like he's waiting for me to slip up." Caleb leaned back in his chair, his expression one of complete indifference. "Then don't slip up. You're overthinking this, Emma. Relax." But Emma couldn't relax. Ryan's growing silence was more unsettling than any confrontation. It was as if he were silently building a case against her, piece by piece, and she had no idea how to stop him. Ryan's next move involved Caleb's professional world. Through a mutual Acquaintance, he learned about a high-stakes real estate deal Caleb was negotiating. It was the kind of deal that could make or break a reputation, and Ryan saw an opportunity to exploit it. Using the connections he'd cultivated over the years, Ryan arranged a meeting with one of the key investors involved in Caleb's project. He presented himself as a concerned party, subtly suggesting that Caleb's personal life might be a liability. "I'm not one to spread rumors," Ryan said, his tone measured and sincere. "But I thought you should know there are whispers about Caleb's extracurricular activities. It's none of my business, of course, but in high-stakes deals like this, perception matters." The investor, a shrewd businessman, took Ryan's words to heart. Caleb's reputation was already a subject of gossip in certain circles, and Ryan's carefully planted doubts added fuel to the fire. Emma's unease reached a boiling point that evening when she returned home to find Ryan in his office, surrounded by documents and photos. Her heart sank as she recognized the images of herself and Caleb, along with printouts of GPS data and text message logs. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Ryan looked up, his expression calm but cold. "Evidence." Emma's face paled. "Evidence of what?" "Of the truth you've been hiding from me," he said, his voice steady. "I know about Caleb. I know about the lies. And I know that you thought I'd never figure it out." Emma's composure crumbled. "Ryan, Don't," he interrupted, his tone sharp. "Don't insult me by pretending there's an explanation. I've given you every opportunity to come clean, but you chose to keep lying. Now it's my turn." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but Ryan felt no sympathy. Her betrayal had cut too deep, and the time for forgiveness had long passed. The next day, Caleb arrived at his office to find chaos. The key investor in his real estate deal had pulled out, citing concerns about Caleb's unreliable reputation. His business partners were demanding answers, and whispers of scandal were spreading like wildfire. Caleb called Emma in a panic. "Did you say something to Ryan?" he demanded. "Did he find out about the deal?" Emma was sobbing on the other end of the line. "He knows everything, Caleb. He's playing us." Caleb's jaw clenched. "Well, he's not going to win. I'll handle this." But for the first time in his life, Caleb realized he was up against someone who wouldn't be intimidated or outmaneuvered. Ryan had taken his time, ensuring every move was calculated and devastating. And Caleb was beginning to see the cracks in his once unshakable confidence. Ryan watched the fallout from a distance, his satisfaction tempered by a lingering sense of loss. This wasn't the life he had envisioned, but it was the one he had been forced to confront. As Emma's world crumbled around her, Ryan felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in months. Closure. Ryan spent his mornings sipping coffee by the large bay window in their living room, his calm exterior hiding the strategic calculations he made with every passing second. The chessboard of their lives was almost fully set. He needed only to move the remaining pieces to ensure Emma and Caleb's self-destruction. Every decision was deliberate, every interaction carefully scripted. Emma was unraveling at a pace that even surprised him. She'd started withdrawing from him, no longer probing his mood or attempting forced conversations over dinner. It seemed as though the photo he'd left behind and her phone's quiet vibrations each night were eroding what little composure she had left. Ryan noticed everything: the pale face, the trembling hands, the nervous glances she shot his way when she thought he wasn't looking. One particular evening, Emma hovered by the kitchen counter as Ryan methodically chopped vegetables for dinner. She seemed desperate to say something, but too terrified to begin. After an unbearable silence, she finally spoke. "Ryan, can we talk?" Her voice wavered, unsure. Ryan set down the knife deliberately, meeting her gaze. "Of course. What's on your mind?" She hesitated, as if weighing whether honesty might salvage what they had left. But the weight of her lies was too heavy for her to bear. Instead, she shook her head. "It's nothing. Forget I said anything." Ryan's lips curved into a small smile. "Okay." He returned to chopping vegetables, but inside he knew she was cracking. Meanwhile, Caleb's world was imploding. The fallout from the investor's withdrawal had created a ripple effect that was threatening to sink his business. Clients were pulling out, employees were whispering behind closed doors, and his carefully curated image of success was beginning to tarnish. He tried to get ahead of the rumors, but Ryan had anticipated his moves. A series of anonymous emails were sent to Caleb's professional contacts, each one carefully worded to sow further doubt about his character. They contained just enough truth to be believable, with a hint of scandal that made them impossible to ignore. Caleb, of course, suspected Ryan, but he had no proof. Every attempt to confront Emma about her husband's involvement was met with tearful apologies and pleas for patience. He's not himself lately, she'd say. But Caleb knew better. Ryan wasn't acting out of emotion. He was playing a long game, and Caleb was losing. Ryan's next move was to enlist an unexpected ally, Lauren. He'd kept her in his back pocket, knowing that her toxic relationship with Emma could be exploited at the right moment. A single phone call was all it took to bring her into the fold. "Lauren, I think we both know Emma hasn't been honest with either of us," he began, his voice calm and persuasive. Lauren's curiosity was piqued. "What are you talking about, Ryan?" "She's been lying to me, and I suspect she's been keeping secrets from you too. I thought you deserved to know." There was a pause on the other end. Then Lauren laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You think I'm surprised? Emma's been lying to everyone for years. What do you want from me?" Ryan leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. "Just the truth. If we work together, I think we can get it." Lauren hesitated, for only a moment before agreeing. Emma had burned her too many times, and the chance to watch her squirm was too tempting to pass up. The cracks in Emma and Caleb's relationship began to show during a tense meeting at a quiet cafe. Emma's nerves were shot, and Caleb's patience was wearing thin. "We have to end this," Emma whispered, her hands clenched around her coffee cup. "Ryan knows. He's been doing something, Caleb. I can feel it." Caleb glared at her. "You're being paranoid. We just need to lie low until this blows over." "Lie low?" Emma's voice rose. "I'm falling apart, Caleb. He's toying with me, and you don't even care." Caleb leaned in, his expression cold. "Get a grip, Emma. If you lose it now, we're both screwed." Their heated exchange was cut short when Emma's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and froze. It was a message from an unknown number. Secrets have a way of surfacing. You'll see. Her blood ran cold. She showed the message to Caleb, who swore under his breath. "It's him," she whispered. "It has to be." Ryan watched from a distance as the cafe scene unfolded. He'd been careful to remain out of sight, but the look of panic on Emma's face was reward enough. His carefully timed message had hit its mark, and the tension between her and Caleb was palpable even from afar. That evening, he returned home to find Emma waiting for him in the living room. She looked disheveled, her usual polished appearance replaced by a woman barely holding herself together. "Ryan, we need to talk," she said, her voice shaky but determined. Ryan tilted his head, feigning confusion. "About what?" "About
"Us," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "About everything." He crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. I'm listening. But before she could begin, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and smirked. You'll have to excuse me, Emma, he said, heading toward his office.
This might take a while. As he closed the door behind him, Emma sank onto the couch, her sobs echoing through the empty house. Ryan's plan was working, but the weight of their crumbling marriage still pressed heavily on him. The path he'd chosen was a lonely one, but there was no turning back now. The tension between Ryan, Emma, and Caleb had reached its breaking point. The calculated chaos Ryan had unleashed was beginning to unravel Emma and Caleb's lives in ways they could no longer ignore. Ryan, however, wasn't finished. His next move would be his boldest yet. Emma sat alone in the darkened living room, her hands trembling as she held her phone. Ryan's cold words from the previous night echoed in her mind. He'd left the house early that morning without saying a word, but his silence was deafening. Emma's guilt and anxiety had turned into paranoia. Every text, every email, every phone call felt like a threat waiting to explode. Caleb, on the other hand, was in damage control mode. The fallout from the real estate deal had left him scrambling. Investors were backing out, and whispers of his personal scandals were spreading faster than he could manage. Caleb prided himself on control, but for the first time he felt powerless.
We need to meet, Caleb barked into his phone. Emma's voice trembled on the other end. Where? I don't know if it's safe. Ryan might be watching us.
Caleb's patience was wearing thin. Just come to my place. We need to figure out what the hell is going on. Meanwhile, Ryan was in his office, meticulously working on the next phase of his plan. He had spent the past few weeks documenting everything: Emma's infidelity, Caleb's professional missteps, and even Lauren's manipulations. Ryan wasn't just seeking revenge, he was crafting a narrative that would expose them all. But he wasn't doing this alone. Ryan picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Hey, it's me," he said when the call connected. "I need your help with something personal." On the other end of the line was an old college friend, Mark, who now worked as a journalist for a prominent online publication. Ryan had always admired Mark's ability to dig deep and uncover the truth, no matter how messy it was. If anyone could help him blow the lid off Emma and Caleb's secrets, it was Mark. "Send me everything you have," Mark said after hearing Ryan's
story.
"If this checks out, it'll be one hell of an exposé." That evening, Emma arrived at Caleb's apartment, her nerves frayed. Caleb's usually immaculate living space was in disarray, reflecting his own state of mind. Papers were scattered. Across the dining table and empty whiskey glasses littered the counter. "What's the plan?" Emma asked, her voice shaky. Caleb paced the room, running a hand through his hair. "The plan is to stay ahead of him. Ryan thinks he's smarter than us, but he's just a guy with a bruised ego. We need to find out what he's planning and shut it down before he can do any more damage." Emma's eyes darted around the room. "How? He's always one step ahead."
"I've never seen him like this before. It's like he's not the same person I married." Caleb's expression hardened. "Then we hit him where it hurts. We'll dig into his business, his finances, whatever we can find. Everyone has skeletons."
"In their closet, Emma. We just need to find his." But Ryan had already anticipated this move. That night, as Caleb and Emma schemed, Ryan's plan was already in motion. He had anonymously sent the evidence of Caleb and Emma's affair to Mark, along with detailed accounts of Caleb's questionable business practices. The package also included a damning audio recording, a conversation between Caleb and Emma, that Ryan had secretly recorded during one of their clandestine meetings. The recording was the final nail in the coffin. In it, Caleb casually discussed using Emma's connections to further his business interests, exposing his manipulative nature and reducing their affair to a transactional convenience. For Emma, it was a betrayal within a betrayal. She'd thought Caleb cared about her, but the recording painted a different picture. The next morning, the article went live. The headline was brutal. Betrayal and Scandal, the double lives of a power couple. The piece detailed Caleb's shady dealings, his affair with Emma, and the ripple effects on Ryan's life and career. It was a masterclass in investigative journalism, sparing no one. Within hours, the story went viral, and the fallout was immediate. Caleb's phone rang incessantly with calls from furious business partners and reporters seeking comment. His name was trending on social media, but for all the wrong reasons. Investors were pulling out of his projects faster than he could respond, and his once flawless reputation was in tatters. Emma, too, was feeling the heat. Friends and acquaintances who had once admired her were now distancing themselves. Even Lauren, her so-called best friend, had gone silent, likely fearing her own involvement might come to light. Ryan watched the chaos unfold from the comfort of his home. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of peace. The people who had betrayed him were finally facing the consequences of their actions, and he had taken back control of his life. But Ryan wasn't naive. He knew this victory came at a cost. Revenge had consumed him, and while it had brought him closure, it hadn't erased the pain of Emma's betrayal. There was no undoing what had been done, and the scars would remain. As he sat in the quiet of his living room, Ryan's phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark. "Mark, the article's blowing up. You okay?" Ryan stared at the screen for a moment before typing his response. "Ryan, I'm good. Thanks for everything." But as he set the phone down, he couldn't shake the lingering question. What comes next? Meanwhile, Caleb and Emma met again, this time in desperation. Caleb's career was in shambles, and Emma's social life had disintegrated. The two of them, once united by their selfish desires, now found themselves turning on each other. "This is your fault," Caleb snarled. "If you'd kept your mouth shut, none of this would have happened," Emma shot back, her voice rising. "My fault? You're the one who dragged me into this. You used me." Their argument escalated, each blaming the other for the disaster their lives had become. But deep down, they both knew the truth. Ryan had outplayed them, and there was no escaping the consequences of their actions. Ryan stood at the edge of the abyss he had so carefully crafted for Emma and Caleb. He'd built his revenge methodically, taking apart their lives piece by piece. But as he sat alone in his dimly lit office, he found himself questioning the satisfaction he'd imagined. Was it worth it? Or had their betrayal dragged him into something darker than he'd anticipated? The fallout from Ryan's plan was beginning to spiral in unexpected directions. Caleb, once untouchable, was now mired in financial ruin. His investors had abandoned him, and whispers of his personal scandal spread like wildfire through his social circles. Caleb's desperation was palpable as he made frantic calls trying to salvage what was left of his reputation. Emma, on the other hand, was a shadow of her former self. Ryan's cold indifference and calculated moves had left her emotionally
wrecked. Her days were spent in a haze of anxiety, waiting for the next blow to land.
Every time she saw Ryan, his silence was more devastating than any confrontation could have been. Lauren, the third wheel in the twisted dynamic, was also feeling the heat. She'd underestimated Ryan, believing he was too passive to ever act on his suspicions. But as Emma began to crumble, Lauren realized her own involvement might come to light. The thought sent chills down her spine. She'd played the role of instigator, planting the seeds of Emma's affair and watching it bloom into chaos. But now, the consequences of her meddling were looming over her like a storm cloud. One evening, Emma's nerves finally snapped. She'd been drinking alone in the living room when Ryan came home, his usual calm demeanor unnerving her further. She slammed her glass down on the table, the sound echoing through the room. "How much longer are you going to do this to me?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "If you're going to leave, just do it. Stop torturing me." Ryan paused in the doorway, his eyes cold and unreadable. "Torturing you? Is that what you think this is?" "Yes," Emma shouted, tears streaming
down her face. "I know I messed up, Ryan. I know I hurt you. But this silent punishment, it's killing me. Just end it already."
Ryan stepped into the room, his expression as calm as ever. "You want me to end it? Fine. But understand this, Emma, I'm not the one who started this. You did, and now you have to live with the consequences." His words cut through her like a knife. Emma collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. For the first time, Ryan felt a pang of guilt. But it was fleeting. He'd given her every chance to come clean, to salvage what they'd built, and she'd thrown it all away. Meanwhile, Caleb's desperation was driving him to reckless decisions. He'd become increasingly paranoid, convinced that someone in his inner circle was feeding information to Ryan. His temper, always volatile, had turned explosive. He'd alienated his few remaining allies, leaving him isolated and vulnerable. One night, Caleb decided he'd had enough. He called Emma, his voice frantic and filled with anger. "You need to get your husband under control," he snarled. "He's destroying my life, and I'm not going to sit back and let it happen." Emma, still reeling from her confrontation with Ryan, was in no mood to deal with Caleb's outburst. "What do you expect me to do, Caleb? He's not listening to me anymore. He's not the same person." Caleb's voice dropped to a menacing tone. "Then make him listen, because if he doesn't back off, I'll make sure he regrets it." The call ended abruptly, leaving Emma feeling more trapped than ever. Caleb's threats only added to her mounting fear. She knew Ryan was pushing Caleb to his breaking point, but she also knew Caleb was capable of anything when cornered. Lauren, sensing the tension escalating, decided it was time to confront Emma. She showed up uninvited at Emma's house, finding her in the kitchen with a bottle of wine. "Emma, we need to talk," Lauren said, her tone serious. Emma looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "About what? How my life is falling apart? Because I'm pretty aware of that already," Lauren sighed, sitting down across from her. "This thing with Ryan, it's getting out of hand. He's not just going after you, he's targeting Caleb too. And if Caleb goes down, he's not going alone. You know that, right?" Emma's hands trembled as she poured another glass of wine. "What am I supposed to do, Lauren? Ryan won't talk to me. Caleb's losing his mind. And I don't even recognize myself anymore." Lauren leaned in, her voice low. "You need to make a choice, Emma. Either you come clean to Ryan and
try to fix this mess, or you walk away before it gets worse. But sitting here doing nothing is only making things worse for everyone." Emma stared at her friend, her mind racing. Lauren was right. She couldn't keep living like this.
But the thought of confronting Ryan again filled her with dread. He wasn't the man she'd married anymore. He was someone else entirely, someone she'd created through her own actions. The breaking point came 2 nights later. Caleb, driven by anger and desperation, showed up at Ryan's house unannounced. He pounded on the door, his voice echoing through the quiet neighborhood. "Ryan!"
"Open the door! We need to talk!" Ryan opened the door slowly, his expression calm despite Caleb's obvious rage. "What do you want?" Caleb pushed past him, stepping into the foyer. "You need to back off," he growled. "Whatever game."
"You're playing? It ends now." Ryan closed the door and turned to face him. "Or what?" Caleb's hands balled into fists. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Pulling strings, ruining lives. But let me tell you something, I'm not going down without a fight." Ryan stepped closer, his voice low and measured. "You already lost, Caleb. You just haven't realized it yet." Caleb's temper snapped. He swung at Ryan, but Ryan anticipated the move, stepping aside and letting Caleb stumble forward. Before Caleb could recover, Ryan grabbed him by the
collar and shoved him against the wall. "You think you're untouchable?"
Ryan hissed. "You think you can destroy people's lives and walk away unscathed? Well, guess what? You're not as invincible as you think." Caleb glared at him, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. For the first time, he realized just how far Ryan was willing to go. As Caleb stumbled out of the house, bruised and humiliated, Ryan watched him from the doorway. He felt no satisfaction, only a hollow emptiness that had been growing ever since this nightmare began. He'd won the battle, but the war had left him scarred in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. Back inside, Emma stood at the top of the stairs, having witnessed the entire confrontation. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, without a word, Ryan turned and walked away, leaving Emma to grapple with the consequences of everything she'd set in motion. Ryan's revenge plan had been precise, but as the days passed, he started noticing a shift in the dynamics of those around him. Emma, Caleb, and Lauren were growing increasingly unstable, their actions more erratic and desperate. While Ryan had anticipated this chaos, he hadn't fully considered the ripple effect his actions would have on his own psyche and the fragile relationships in his life. Emma sat in the living room, the once cozy space now a cold battlefield of silent tension. The house she had once considered her sanctuary now felt suffocating. Ryan had barely spoken to her since he had revealed his knowledge of the affair, and his cold indifference was beginning to unravel her nerves. Every creak of the floorboards, every glance he gave her was laced with unspoken judgment. "Ryan," she began, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." Ryan looked up from his laptop, his expression unreadable. "Talk about what?" Emma's hands clenched into fists. "About us, about where we go from here. You can't keep punishing me like this." Ryan leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Punishing you? Emma, this isn't punishment, this is reality. You made your choices, now you're living with the consequences." Tears welled in Emma's eyes. "I'm sorry, Ryan, Sorry doesn't fix this," he interrupted, his tone icy. "You didn't just hurt me, you destroyed everything we built together. And for what? A man who can't even keep his own life in order?" Emma's lip quivered, but she said nothing. She knew there was no defense she could offer that would satisfy him. Instead, she retreated to the bedroom, leaving Ryan alone with his thoughts. Caleb, meanwhile, was on the verge of losing everything. The fallout from Ryan's interference had reached every corner of his professional life. Investors were pulling out of deals, clients were refusing to take his calls, and whispers of scandal were spreading like wildfire. He sat in his office, staring at the stack of papers on his desk. Contracts, termination notices, and legal threats piled up, a tangible representation of his crumbling empire. For the first time in his life, Caleb felt powerless. His charm and arrogance had always been his shield, but now they were useless against the storm Ryan had unleashed. Picking up his phone, Caleb dialed Emma's number. When she answered, her voice was shaky. "Caleb? What is it?" "We need to meet," he said, his tone urgent. "This is getting out of hand. Your husband, he's playing us, and if we don't do something, he's going to win." Emma hesitated. "I don't think there's anything we can do. Ryan, he's not the man I thought he was. He's ruthless." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Then we'll fight fire with fire. Meet me at our usual place. We'll figure this out together." Emma agreed, reluctantly, though a part of her wondered if Caleb was really the ally she needed. His desperation was palpable, and it was clear he was more concerned with saving himself than helping her. Lauren, on the other hand, was spiraling in her own way. The chaos she had once thrived on was now consuming her. She hadn't anticipated how deeply Ryan's actions would disrupt her carefully curated facade. Her toxic friendship with Emma was crumbling, and the whispers of her involvement in the affair were beginning to surface in her social circles. Late one night, Lauren received a text from Ryan. It was simple but chilling. "We need to talk.
Meet me tomorrow." Her heart raced as she stared at the message. What did Ryan want? Did he know the extent of her role in Emma's betrayal?
She spent the rest of the night pacing her apartment, unable to shake the feeling that her own secrets were about to come to light. The next day, Ryan met Lauren at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. She arrived late, her usual confidence, replaced by nervous energy. "Ryan," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "This is unexpected." Ryan regarded her with a calm intensity. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Lauren, about Emma, about you, about everything that's happened." Lauren forced a smile. "I'm not sure what you mean." Ryan leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Don't play dumb. You've been meddling in our lives for years, pushing Emma toward Caleb, stirring the pot every chance you got. You're as much a part of this mess as they are." Lauren's smile faltered. "Ryan, Save it," he interrupted. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to warn you. If you don't stay out of this from now on, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are." Lauren's face turned pale. "You wouldn't?" Ryan's eyes narrowed. "Try me." The weight of his words hung in the air as Lauren sat frozen, her mind racing. For the first time, she realized she had underestimated Ryan's resolve. That evening, Emma and Caleb met at the dimly lit bar where their affair had begun. It was a bitterly ironic setting for their desperate conversation. "He's tearing us apart," Caleb said, his frustration evident. "We need to do something before it's too late." Emma stared into her drink, her mind clouded with guilt and fear. "What can we do? He's always one step ahead of us." Caleb's eyes darkened. "Then we stop playing defense. We take the fight to him." Emma looked up, alarmed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to find his weakness," Caleb replied. "Everyone has one, even Ryan." But as Caleb spoke, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that their actions were only pushing them further into the trap Ryan had set. She'd seen the cold determination in her husband's eyes, and she knew he wouldn't stop until he had destroyed them both. Ryan, watching from the shadows, felt a mix of satisfaction and unease. He'd come this far, but at what cost? The man he had become was unrecognizable even to himself. The line between justice and vengeance had blurred, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing more than he was gaining. As he left the bar, his mind churned with conflicting emotions. The tipping point had arrived, and the final act was about to begin. The atmosphere in the courtroom was heavy with tension. Ryan sat silently at the plaintiff's table, his expression unreadable. This was the culmination of months of planning. of strategic moves that had brought both Emma and Caleb to their knees. Emma, seated beside her attorney, avoided Ryan's gaze, her once confident demeanor replaced with visible anxiety. Caleb sat a few rows behind her, his face a mask of anger and frustration. Their worlds had collided, and now they would face the consequences. The morning began with Ryan reviewing the final pieces of his case with his attorney. He had documented everything, the evidence of Emma's affair, the financial misconduct she and Caleb had engaged in, and the impact their actions had on his business and emotional well-being. Every piece of evidence was a weapon, meticulously prepared to ensure that justice would be served. As the judge entered the courtroom, everyone rose, the case was introduced, and the prosecution began to present its arguments. Ryan listened as his attorney laid out the timeline of events, weaving a narrative that painted Emma and Caleb as not only unfaithful but also reckless and deceitful. The judge's expression remained neutral, but Ryan could see the subtle shifts in her posture, the way her pen tapped against the desk when certain points were made. She was listening. When Emma took the stand, her voice trembled as she answered questions. Her attorney tried to spin the narrative, painting her as a woman who had been neglected and emotionally abandoned by her husband. But Ryan's attorney was relentless. With each piece of evidence presented, text messages, financial transactions, and witness testimonies, Emma's story unraveled. "Mrs. Carter," the attorney said, holding up a printed transcript of one of Emma's conversations with Caleb. "Can you explain these messages where you and Mr. Ford discussed transferring funds from your husband's business account to cover your personal expenses?" Emma's face paled. I didn't mean for it to happen that way. Caleb said it was temporary." "So you admit to taking funds without your husband's knowledge?" Emma stammered, her eyes darting toward Caleb, who glared at her from the back of the courtroom. It wasn't like that." "No further questions," the attorney said, stepping away with a satisfied look. Caleb's turn on the stand was no less damning. Ryan's attorney dug into his shady business dealings, revealing how he'd used Emma to funnel money into risky investments that ultimately failed. Caleb's attempts to deflect blame only made him look worse. The courtroom murmured as more and more of his schemes were brought to light. "Mr. Ford," the attorney said, "you claim that you and Mrs. Carter were in a consensual relationship. Were you aware that your actions were destroying her marriage and jeopardizing her husband's
livelihood?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "I wasn't responsible for their marriage problems. That was between them."
"And yet you actively encouraged her to divert funds from her husband's business. Was that also between them?" Caleb's silence was answer enough. As the trial continued, Ryan's resolve never wavered. He knew this wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It was about reclaiming his dignity and ensuring that Emma and Caleb faced the consequences of their actions. The evidence was overwhelming, and the judge's final verdict reflected that. Emma was ordered to repay the money she had taken from Ryan's business, along with a significant penalty for breach of trust. Caleb's reputation was shattered, his business deals falling apart as investors pulled out in the wake of the trial. The court ruled in Ryan's favor, granting him full ownership of the marital assets and clearing his name of any wrongdoing. After the trial, Ryan stood outside the courthouse, the weight of the past year finally lifting from his shoulders. Lauren approached him, her usual smirk replaced with a rare moment of sincerity. "You really did it," she said, her voice tinged with admiration. "You took them down." Ryan looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I didn't do this to win. I did it to end it." Lauren nodded, sensing the finality in his words. "What now?" Ryan glanced at the horizon, the first hints of a new beginning on the horizon. Now, I move on. That evening, Ryan returned home to an empty house. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was a canvas on which he could paint a new life. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat by the window watching as the city lights flickered in the distance. For the first time in months, he felt at peace. The betrayal had cut deep, but it hadn't broken him. He had faced the storm and come out stronger, ready to rebuild his life on his own terms. Months had passed since the courtroom drama, and Ryan had started a new chapter in his life. Emma, burdened by debt and public humiliation, lived in the shadow of her choices while Caleb's once thriving career lay in ruins. Ryan sold the house they had shared, using the money to start fresh in a new city, far from the ghosts of his past. He built a life centered around his passions and self-respect, knowing he deserved better than betrayal. Though the scars of their infidelity remained, Ryan found peace in his resilience. Trust was broken, but his dignity was intact, a foundation for the brighter days ahead.